what's the most fucked up thing your daughter has asked you thus far?
About
anything where you're just like, that's weird.
Oh gosh. I don't. That's a tough one. I can't even say right now.
She never catches you off guard.
Not really. No, I'm prepared for anything.
You're ready to have the sex talk now. She's age 9. My Jen was almost about to have the sex talk with Harley, and Harley's age not quite 9ish, could be 9 next month, because I guess like the kids in school have been talking about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's just a font of misinformation.
Why were you misinformed at 8?
I don't think I knew what sex was.
Yeah, I didn't either, so I'm so surprised it's that
I
early.
remember when I was young though, like there was a book. Remember that book Gnomes?
Yeah, the gnome tits.
Yes. And there was one image in the book where a gnome woman was breastfeeding a kid.
Yeah.
And that really captured my imagination, and I started drawing fucking gnomes naked and doing weird things like pissing in each other's mouths and whatnot. Just that kind of like young exploration of like.
You go from tits to fucking golden showers in the mouth. That is a little bizarre.
It kind of makes the movies make sense. But I remember that my father found my drawings, and I got in huge trouble. And I was just like, but I got that from the Gnome book. I saw it in the Gnome book. And he's like, you show me. And I showed him the book, and it was just, all the gnomes had clothes on except for the one that was breastfeeding. And I think my father was trying to figure out how I went from fucking a breastfeeding gnome, who you couldn't even see the nipple, you just saw a kind of exposed boob, to, gnomes pissing each other's faces, taking poops and shit like that.
I think that he was probably right to question that. He didn't give you a Rorschach test or anything after that?
He was actually pretty good about it. But it was more embarrassing than anything else, because even at a young age, I knew, like, all right, what was in the book and what I'm drawing are two completely different things.
You're using it as an excuse. If I get caught, I'm going to use this gnome excuse.
It wasn't even that premeditated, but like in that moment, I was just like, well, but look at the gnome book. And but I still had the sense to know that like what I was doing was transgressing beyond what was in the gnome book. Like that was a rather innocent image, and I was kind of creating, naughty images and shit like that. And he got bummed about it and yelled at me and shit. And it was more embarrassing than anything else. And I blamed my brother, like at one point, which years later when he turns out to be gay, that is even funnier. But when, at that point, I was like, Donald gave me that book. I got the book from Donald. He got it from the library. And my brother later on, my father was just like, don't show him stuff like that. And my brother was like, why would you do that to me? Right, there's nothing in that book that looks like what you were drawing. You're trying to get me in trouble. I was trying to get the heat off me. And I was young, dude. I was about 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old. But I had no idea what sex was until
I don't believe I was.
Fucking later on.
It definitely wasn't in my frame of, like,
When did you know about jerking off? How old were you? You're like, what's jerking off?
Not teens, easily.
Really?
Yeah.
I think I was about 12. I stole a Hustler magazine.
Almost teens?
Yeah, it was pretty close. No, I was actually... Yeah, it was 12, early 12, like end of 11, beginning of 12. I stole a Hustler magazine from Katz's, and in the letters section, it was Penthouse, wasn't Hustler. In the letters section, there was a chick talking about, a guy talking about getting a hand job from a chick where she spit in her hand and fucking rubbed it in his dick. And I was like, well, I can spit in my hand. I can fucking pull this off. And I did it, and it felt good, but I didn't know where it was going. Like, dude didn't talk about, if he talked about blowing a load, I wouldn't have known what that meant and shit. But I was about 12 at that point, I think. With the age, with in a world where like my 8-year-old daughter has some inclination based on schoolmates who have older sisters, where they're getting their information filtered down into the mind of an 8-year-old. So it's just not, they don't know the particulars. They just know that a man and woman are different and they do weird things together. Are you concerned for that moment where you have to have the conversation, or will Debbie have the conversation?
Oh, yeah, my wife will have the conversation, and I want no part of it. I didn't get a conversation, and I'm thankful to this day that I didn't get a conversation.
Yeah, I never got one either. Because Jen, that night, Jen was going like, well, I'm thinking I'm going to have the talk with Harley. I was like, she's 8. And she's like, well, how old were you when you had the talk? And I was like, I never did.
Right.
I had to. It was all.
You didn't need no talk.
No, like you hear from friends, and then you read books. Like I want.
Well, maybe you did with fucking pissing in fucking Gnome's mouth and shitting in their mouths.
Yeah, I was like, I can't wait to have fucked up sex.
That girl looks like a gnome.
But I was just like, that seems young. And she was like, Gail, her mom had the talk with her when she was 9. I guess mothers and daughters have the talk earlier because period kicks in at a certain point. And so they have to explain that and stuff. I mean, I can't even imagine that moment. Like, my kid is so, like, hypersensitive to injury that for her to, like, all of a sudden she has a period, it would just be like, she'd be terrified. And that's why Jen had, like, the conversation with her early. I think she had the period conversation with her, like, last year at some point. Even though, like, the period is probably way far, well, not way far away, but still a few years down the road for the kid.
I have no idea.
But I never got to talk.
No.
And as you say, was incredibly grateful. I just couldn't imagine, like, me and sex and my parents just never. I'm only comfortable now saying shit like blowjob in front of my mother, and even then, it's just like she's like, ugh.
I don't even.
You would never.
I can't even begin to say this. Something.
Well, I'm not like, hey, mom, give someone a blowjob, but just the term, having the term.
I don't even curse in front of my mom.
Do you really?
No.
You don't? I do. I enjoy that. It makes me feel like more grown up around her, and less like her son, and more like an equal.
Yeah.
I remember when I was when I got into jerking off, I was just like, well, nobody must know about this because nobody ever talks about it or anything like that. And I would like jerk off in my bed at night, and I would have tissues, to fucking clean up. And then the tissues I would just throw on the floor, and it never occurred to me to like pick them up and throw them out. And one day, my father and mother were going out. I was going to be alone in the house. And I always had to walk him to the door and lock the door behind him. And my mom heads to the car. My father stops at the door. He's just like, "Hey, why don't you pick up your tissues in the future, the ones around your bed?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I had a runny nose last night." And he was like, "No, you didn't," and walked away. And I was just like, "Oh God, he knows." It was such an awkward moment. That's the closest to a sex conversation I ever had with my fucking father. But I can't imagine how he felt having to like say that. Because he was like a shy dude to begin with.
I just would have picked him up. I'm not that even like I just would have picked him up and not even addressed it.
What, him? He's like, I'm picking up my son's fucking old
wad. I would have said, Grace, go pick up those tissues. Kevin had a runny nose last night.
Well, that's...
Wow, it must have been a bad one, Tiger.
Yeah, I was like, boy, you're going to empty the box. I was like, I think I got a sinus thing. She's like, that's snot, all right. Dick snot. You disgust me.